think, back, you know this, I've got two autoimmune diseases. So I've got lupus and rheumatoid arthritis that at one point in my life was extremely painful, and to be the point now where I'm running full marathons and doing, 100-mile bike rides, things like that. And, I'm not competitive, but I'm certainly not in last place either. I would have never imagined that would have been a possibility, 7 years ago. When I first got the disease and it hurt to walk, it hurt to start a car up. I couldn't lift a book off the counter without being in pain. That was tough for me, and I think I went to a point where I prayed and I fasted a lot, and I said, I want this to be gone. I want this kind of cup to pass from me. But if it didn't, if there's some reason that I had to have it, I wanted to be thankful that I had it. And so that was 7 years ago. And so recently, maybe 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, I was reading this story about this young man who was a collegiate rugby player, and he was working a part-time job before he went to college or something like that. And anyways, long story short, he was working construction, and a rope got caught around his arm, and then got caught in a fan, and it pulled all the flesh off of his arm. He lost his arm, and it kind of shattered him. Not being able to play rugby kind of shattered his own perception of who he was. And I could relate to that because to some degree those diseases kind of shattered the perception of who I was. And so anyways, he went through a life and had a lot of trouble. He had trouble with addiction and things like that. But he saw someone running an Ironman one day, and they had so much conviction and dedication to that race that he thought he wanted to try some triathlon. So he won a spot in Kona, which is the biggest triathlon in the world, and I think he placed top 400 of all people. So this guy swam 2.5 miles with one arm. He rode a regular road bike with one arm, through Hawaii for 114 miles, and then he ran a marathon. And he beat out 75% of the people there. So even the people with two arms, And he went on to be a pretty successful endurance athlete, and even got back into the sport of rugby a little bit. But at the end of that chapter, he said, one of his friends said, hey, just imagine what you could have done if you had had both arms, in this sport. And he said, what do you mean? He's like, well, you could have gone on to be even better. And he said, if I would have never lost my arm, I would have never got in this sport. I would have never done any of it. And I knew at that moment when I was reading that book, and I was sitting on a plane, I was sitting there reading it, I started crying. And that was the first time I realized that, the father that I've become, the leader that I've become, the person I've become, and the athlete that I've become was all because of the diseases that have been put into my life. And I was able to say for the first time in 9 years at that point, thank you. Like, I'm grateful that this crucible came into my life, because it's taught me so much about who I am. It's taught me so much about what I can be and what I can overcome. And I am genuinely thankful that I've had the opportunity to go through a strengthening time of that, and then apply it to other areas of my life. So I think for a God moment that kind of relates, I think that would be the one.